You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. When I need a break from this heavy news cycle, I find refuge in books and bookstores. And while I'm there for distraction, others may be looking for love. It's the stuff of daydreams, wandering into a bookstore, single and lonely, and hoping you'll meet the love of your life. It's also the setup for Moira Macdonald's debut novel, Storybook Ending. It's a story about isolation, friendship, reading, and of course, the singular pleasure of spending time between the shelves of a cozy bookshop in Seattle. The shop in question is based on Ravenna's Third Place Books, where Moira Macdonald is a frequent customer. Seattle Times arts critic and debut novelist Moira Macdonald, thanks for being on Soundside today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So you took a leave from your job at the Times to write this book. You pointed in the acknowledgments that you wrote a debut novel a little bit later in life than maybe your typical first-time author. And I'm curious, as somebody who's been an established critic and has a wonderful career in journalism, how did it feel to pivot and do this? Did it feel like a risk?
It was a huge risk. It was a huge financial risk, for one thing. When you go on leave from the Times, they do not pay you. But this was something I'd wanted to try. I'd thought for years, you know, how you always have something in the back of your mind that I think I might be good at that. And I always thought, I think I could write a novel. I don't know how. I don't know when I'd have time, but I would like to try. And a few things happened in life. The pandemic happened. My father died a few years ago. I had a milestone birthday approaching. And I just thought, Moira, you need to just try this.
If not now, when?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I thought, if this doesn't work out, then I know it didn't work out. And I will just carry on with what is a very nice life. But I just wanted to try it. So that was 2022 that I went on leave for about, I think, 5 or 6 months and sat down and wrote that thing that is now in front of you.
Was there a little bit of sense, because as a journalist myself and as a critic, you always have the thing. Either for me, it's the headline of the day, or for you, it's the movie you just saw or the piece of art you just witnessed. And you're like, this is my topic. But when you truly have a blank page, did that freak you out at all?
It did, but it was also enormously freeing, knowing that I could just make this up. Because as a journalist, even though I'm a critic, and so I have a lot more sort of freedom in what I can say, everything I say I have to be able to back up. Everything I say has to be sort of based, in fact, in some way. But creating a world, creating a group of people who didn't exist, and finding for each of them, okay, what is her life? What is her job? Who are the people in her circle? How does that work? How are these people I've created going to interact? And I didn't know how they would. I didn't outline the book because I don't like to outline. And so it was just kind of an adventure having these people live in my head for a long time.
Are you the type of author, sometimes I hear people say that their characters talk to them. Do you have conversations with your characters?
Not so much conversations, but they did walk around with me for a very long time. One of my characters, for example, works in a department store. And so if I was at Nordstrom's, I'd see a dress, I think, oh, would Laura like that? Maybe she would. And Laura's fictional. I made her up. But she was kind of walking around with me for a long time. They all were. Not so much now. I've started something else now. And so these people, I've kind of let them free to go live their best lives. But yeah, they were in my head for a long time.
So the other characters, you mentioned Laura, are April and Wesley. These are the three voices that the narration skips between throughout the book. They're all extremely Seattle, I would say, in their own way. Laura works at what is a big downtown department store, as you mentioned. It's Nordstrom to a local reader. April works from home for a tech company, and Wesley is a floppy-haired, handsome, plaid-shirted loner who works at a bookstore, the bookstore that we mentioned. How did you settle on these archetypes?
They were all people I was just kind of thinking about. April was where I began because during the pandemic, I was thinking a lot about my younger colleagues who were single and maybe getting just started in their career. And I thought, how hard must this be that they probably live alone, or maybe with roommates they're not close to, and they're at home by themselves. And this is just going on day to day. And how do they connect? How are they going to sort of launch in the way that most of us were able to do in our 30s? And so April is, I think I said she's 33 or something like that.
Yeah, early 30s.
Yeah, early 30s, which is an interesting age. It's an age where a lot of your friends are kind of pairing up, and some of them are, getting married and having kids and doing all that. And she isn't there yet, and she's just sitting alone in her apartment with her laptop. And that kind of came from thinking about my colleagues, thinking about that time of life, and thinking about how the pandemic changed work for so many of us. Now, many, many people, myself included, work from home. And I thought, okay, how do you shake up your life when you work from home? And I decided, okay, this young woman is going to make a bold gesture. And she wants to meet this man at the bookstore. So instead of walking up to him and saying, "Hi, I'm April," she leaves a note in a book. And unfortunately, what happens is that he doesn't get it. Somebody else does.
Something else happens to that note, dear listeners, and you are going to have to read the book to find out. But it is kind of the inciting incident and creates kind of the momentum for the rest of what happens in Storybook Ending. That loneliness factor that you mentioned, that I think I know a lot of people in Generation Z. I'm a millennial, and a lot of millennials who are experiencing that same thing. The sitting in your apartment with your laptop all day long and craving more personal connection. And April, I think, is somebody who exemplifies that, your character, April. Why did you want to really channel that? You said you were looking at your colleagues, basically, who were experiencing that. Like, what slice of it did you want to really dive into that aspect of the loneliness that was increased by the pandemic? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, just this whole thing of working from home, and I've been working for a long time. I've been at the Seattle Times 24 years, and I had a career before that. And I've never worked from home until the pandemic began. And it was such a very strange thing. And it just upended how we interact with our workplace. Most of us, before the pandemic, we went to a place that was full of people, and we sat at a desk that had people around, and we chatted with them. And I know that I got so many of my best ideas at work from just walking around and talking to my colleagues, and I met people, and you make friends, and you see romance bloom in the workplace sometimes, and the workplace was just something so significant for so many of us, and for many people now it's gone away. And I thought, well, let's look at what that would look like for a woman in her early mid-30s who is missing that, who kind of, there's a few times in the book she speaks nostalgically about, I remember when I went to an office, it was really something.
Yeah, and she has this awkwardness about social interaction that I know I still hang on to a little bit of that from the kind of hangover from the pandemic. So we're talking about the setup of the book. There is this mislaid note that's stuck in the pages of a novel. And I think it speaks to kind of the desperation of somebody working from home, looking to try to meet somebody in increasingly creative ways that aren't dating apps. There's also a mystery element. There's some comedy going on. So it's like you've got all these different genres: romance, comedy, mystery. How much did you think about genre when you started to write the book?
Well, I love rom-coms. And as a movie critic, I have reviewed many of them. Many of them, sadly, are not good, but a lot of them are great. And it's interesting how the fiction equivalent of a rom-com is not something you see a great deal of. You see romance novels, and that's one thing. That's a genre. And some of those are wonderful, but they very much follow a format. And I didn't want my book to follow a format. I wanted people to read it not quite knowing what was going to happen. But I wanted to borrow some conventions from rom-coms, to have a romantic triangle. In my case, nobody in the triangle knows that they're in the triangle, which I think is kind of a fun twist. I wanted it to be joyful. Life has been kind of difficult for the last few years. One little story I've been telling is that I go to Third Place Books, Ravenna, very often. It's in my neighborhood, and I was there a while ago, years ago, looking for a book like what I just described, and I wasn't really finding that book that day. And then I looked up, and there's a sign up on the wall by the front desk, and it's a quote from Toni Morrison, a very famous quote that I know, but I'd never seen it in that context. And it was, "If you cannot find the book you want to read, then you must write it." And I was like, okay, universe. Okay, Toni. Heard. Message received. Okay.
So each of your main characters, I noticed, has a job that involves taste and style and taste making in some way. You have April, who works at she gives feedback on photos of houses to help people sell their houses. We have a personal shopper. We have somebody who decides whether a book is sellable, basically. And I can't help but notice that you are a tastemaker yourself as a critic. Was it important that your characters have a discerning eye, or do you just assume that everybody does? As a critic yourself, you project?
I think I do assume that everybody does. That's so funny because you spelled that out and I never really thought about it that much. I did want them all to have jobs that sort of had some element of curation, because it's part of the plot that these notes are being left. April is writing a note that she thinks Wesley is getting. Someone else gets it, but needs to believe that note is for her. So there have to be some kind of similarities in what they do and some references that will make sense no matter who the person is. But yeah, I didn't really think about that before. But I do think all of us spend our days kind of saying, well, I like that, I don't like that. Having pleasant judgments on things.
Yeah. There's also a lot of fashion and fashion advice in the book. Do you think of yourself as kind of a fashionista?
I don't know about fashionista.
I love your dress, by the way. Your outfit is beautiful.
I gave Laura the job that I have always wanted to have, which is being a personal shopper who tells people exactly what to wear, which I have done with some of my friends, which has been a lot of fun. So yeah, it's kind of my dream. Actually, they all kind of have my dream jobs. I've never worked in a bookstore, and I always wanted to, and that's what Wesley does. And yeah, April, I've had some tech jobs, so that's...
Her job is less aspirational.
Yeah, a little less. But although her apartment is an apartment I had once.
I had that apartment once too. When I was reading, I used to live in a 1-bedroom on Capitol Hill, nearby bookstores and movie theaters I could walk to, and I could hear my neighbors upstairs and downstairs, all of those things. It kind of put me back to that time in life. So as a critic, you are now, with your debut novel out there, somebody who has to read criticism of your own work. How is that going? What are you noticing, or what kind of feelings does that bring up?
Well, unfortunately, when you are an unknown person with a debut novel, you don't get a great deal of reviews, certainly not in the national press.
We need more criticism of Moira's work, everybody. No, just kidding.
So I haven't seen a whole lot. There have been a few in Publishers Weekly and Kirkus Reviews, and those have been very nice. There's been some really nice feedback on social media. There's also been a few, the kind of thing where people write and say, well, this book has too many characters. I didn't like it.
What do you say to that?
I don't have anything to say to that. It's like, okay, I'm sorry. Why don't you go find a book with fewer characters? Okay.
That's a good one. What do you think, just in terms of your role as a critic, what do you think has changed the most about the job? I mean, has been this whole democratization of the media and also of criticism, right? Everybody has a Letterboxd account or whatever, and they can write their own reviews now. What do you think has changed most about your role as a critic since you started your career?
There's more voices out there, as you say. When I started, there weren't as many women writing about film. I started almost 25 years ago, and it was a little unusual. When I would go to a film festival, go to something, most of the film critics were men who were somewhat older than me. They were all Roger Ebert, of Roger Ebert's generation. And since then, I'm seeing a much more diverse group of people who are writing and speaking about film, and some of them are amazingly good, and I've seen quite a few who just kind of start with their blog or whatever and become very influential, gather an audience on social media. And it's been nice to see just that diversification of voices in criticism.
This book has a lot of minor characters, which are very delightful. April's brother, I think, is one of them. Laura's supportive, high-powered lawyer, best friend. Did you ever think maybe sequel, maybe spinoff for any of these characters?
No, they're done.
You've already moved on.
When you call a book Storybook Ending, you have to give it a nice ending. Maybe not the one they're looking for, but it's a nice ending, and so they're all kind of tied up. They're living their best lives. They're okay. I'm not going to revisit any of them.
As a huge fan of rom-coms, if you had to cast a perfect version of Storybook Ending, and I'm not talking about even people as they are in their careers now, but if you had to take like the pantheon of actors from your favorite rom-coms and cast Storybook Ending as a movie or limited series, how would you cast it? Putting you on the spot.
Oh, my. Okay. You know who just popped into my head, and I don't know if anyone's going to even know this name, but Judy Greer was an actress who she was kind of the supporting player and the best friend in so many great rom-coms, and I see her, I think that Judy Greer, some years ago, I think, would be great for Laura.
Yeah, 13 going on 30. Mm-hmm. She was in 27 Dresses. She's in like a lot of great ones.
I can see her as Laura. Her some years ago. Laura's about 40-ish.
She'd be great with the comedy.
Yes. April, I don't know. People ask me this question a lot, and I've kind of resisted answering it because you don't kind of want to start thinking about your characters as an actor, although the book's done now, so it's not going to do any harm.
It's not going to affect your writing, yeah.
No. I honestly don't have great casting for the rest of them. They're very clear in my head. Like, I have a very vivid picture of what April looks like, but it's not anybody I've ever met or seen.
Yeah.
So I'd have to find someone who looked like that.
Judy Greer is a great choice and a good, below the line, deeper cut. So lightning round for me personally, as I'm, thinking about the movie criticism of yours that I've read over the years, oftentimes, or your series with Bethany Jean Clement, Dinner and a Movie, that's what it's called, right?
Yes.
Dinner and a Movie. You go to movie theaters all over the region. You are a movie theater aficionado. If you had to pick the number one theater that is now defunct that you miss the most in the region, what would it be? And why?
Sadly, there are so many that are not with us anymore. I would have to say, even though it wasn't a great theater in terms of sightlines or anything, but I loved the Seven Gables. There was something about walking up the stairs, the Seven Gables, to that beautiful, beautiful lobby off to the side, to the way the theater was so cozy. It had that weird 1970s mural that rolled up. It had that funny chandelier that kind of pulled up into the ceiling. I had many, many happy movie experiences there, and I know it's just an empty lot right now, and I drive by it all the time, and I think about what it was like to see movies there. So
yeah. But there was something kind of magical about that. For me, it was the Harvard exit because I used to live around the corner.
Yeah.
And that one, boy, that was a heartbreaker for sure. Do you have a current favorite spot to see the movies in Seattle or around?
I love Cinerama. Yeah. I haven't been there as much lately as I would like to because they tend to... The same movie will play there for maybe a couple of weeks. And usually it's something I've already seen because I reviewed it. But I love, love, love getting lost in that screen.
Yeah. The Beacon is programming so many cool things, too. I am loving the Beacon lately. What do you hope somebody who's not from this city takes away when they read this book that has so many archetypes and scenes and just really the feelings of being in the city of Seattle? What do you hope a reader from elsewhere takes away?
Well, it's been a funny thing that's been following this book around is that many people seem to think it's set in a small town. Like the genre on Barnes & Noble at one point, until we had it corrected, said fiction, small town. And I've read several reviews on social media that have said this book is set in a small town. And of course, Seattle is not a small town. And I've decided to find that really charming because there's something about, and I think places in Seattle are very much like this, a bookstore where people gather. And it does kind of feel like a small town because you see the same people there when you go and you get to know them.
And it's neighborhood based.
Yeah.
So there is a sense of like community that maybe people take away a small town feel from.
Yeah. And so I think that's great. And so I hope people reading this will see that, Seattle is a beautiful place, but it's also a city of neighborhoods. And within those neighborhoods are full of stories.
So, okay, before we go, for folks who are going into their summer and they're looking for either book or movie recommendations, what are you reading or watching right now, or things that you've recently read or watched that you would recommend for somebody who wants a diverting, delicious summer entertainment?
Okay, I just finished reading Anthony Horowitz's Marble Hall Murders, and his book Magpie Murders plays a role in Storybook Ending.
It sure does.
It is the book that April's note gets left in. It's a trio of novels. The middle one is Moonflower Murders, and they're so brilliant and they're so diverting because each of them is a contemporary mystery wrapped up in a 1950s sort of Agatha Christie style mystery. And the way that he entwines these two is just so very clever. His main character, wonderfully, is a middle-aged British book editor named Susan Ryland, who drives a little red MG and is brilliant at solving mysteries. And she's kind of my alter ego in this world, I think. There's a wonderful PBS adaptation of the first two books, and I'm sure there will be one of Marble Hall Murders as well. But Marble Hall Murders just came out. So I just recently finished that, and that's a great summer read.
That was me using the radio station as my personal recommendation engine. So I really appreciate that because I'm looking for a new read right now. Moira Macdonald is the Seattle Times arts critic and the author of Storybook Ending, her debut novel. It is breezy. There's some romance, but it's also got a ton of great stuff about friendship. It'll lift your mood even in dark times. Moira, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.